How's it going, everybody? Uh, so, I was sitting down the other day and I did a lot of talking on my drive to and from Kansas about card design and how I would actually really like there to be a more aggressive ban list for the game. And I did this, a long time ago, but I think back then I didn't really understand the game the same way that I do right now. But I sat down and I kind of went through and I said, what cards would I change their positions on the list? Go from there. So I wanted to kind of sit through, figure things out, brought a bunch of cards that I thought were at least interesting to talk about, and we'll see if you all agree with me on some of these. So these are unfortunately not going to be in any like order other than like the cost order that they're printed at. So just kind of get used to that. First things first, kites. Oh, that is very large. Maybe there's a better way of doing this. Hold on, let's try to. Boop. That's really good. Okay. So kites, I think, really removes your ability to interact with Sky Pirates, and I don't think Sky Pirates are like the end-all, be-all deck, but I do find it very frustrating to play against this archetype because of how little interaction this little idiot gives them. Removal spells don't really work anymore, and like, yeah, there are things that like happen that you can play around this with. I think it's very easy to burn kites poorly, which is like a skill check, but it's such a lopsided trade. It's it's so hard to interact with. I don't find it particularly enjoyable to play against. Maybe this would be a big nerf to Fran, but I think Fran has other things she could pivot to if Kites wasn't around. Leo, I think, is a card that was a fun experiment, and the experiment is over. This card is completely uninteractive once it gets set up. The entire purpose is to turbo into 6 characters in a really frustrating and annoying way. It's basically solved. 3 Larsa, 3 Thornton, 3 Sarah, 3 Waka, 2 Gordon. You play a Realm at some point to get a Sahagin Sheaf and an Adamantoise, or a Sahagin. And and that's it. Like that's everything you need. And what the gameplay pattern of Leo ends up being, the Leo deck has no control elements. It is not a control deck. It is a deck that intends to just get to those, which I've seen as early as turn 3, and the game just kind of ends. And you can't interact with Leo anymore because they can keep pooping out Leos faster than you could ever actually do anything about it. I think the fact that he casts the cards is extremely problematic because it means that he can abuse something like Warrior of Light to get all of its backups back after casting them. I think that he takes the Hagen Sheaf from being actually a really cool, interesting card to just being Althea. I've seen this guy play things like Gao to get back Sahagin Sheaf as effectively a respin for free that also stacks up other Sahagin Sheafs on the field. And it's just frustrating. There's no way to interact with him. You can't. He's not even like vulnerable to like Brynhilda or anything. Like you have to like hit it this 1 CP 7k with a legitimate removal spell to try to survive. But like, oh no, it's Spun Theodore or Sephiroth, and the game is now over. And I think this deck is the hardest scaling deck in the game, but it's not healthy or fun for either player to look at to play. So I really just would like it if Leo was gone. I do know that this is a controversial one because this is a lot of people's favorite deck in the game, but I cannot stand this deck. Mira, again, another card that I know people really, really like. And if Mira had the exact same text, but dulled the monster that she chose so that it couldn't be used as an infinite blocker, I would be okay with this card. And I think that like the counterplay is going to show up to this. This one's a little bit less egregious than I thought it was. But the Mira zombie loop, and like some decks don't have an out to that because the zombie is going to be made unbreakable before it's ever a forward. And then when it becomes relevant, it becomes a forward. At which point you have to have either instant speed, dulling, or ability removal, or something. Or you have to have instant speed monster breaking as Mira chooses the target, which is only a couple of elements have access to. Like fire can never deal with Mira. If you're on like a mono fire deck and your opponent's on Mira, Mira zombie, Mira zombie, Mira zombie, there's 7 turns where you literally cannot damage your opponent. And I don't find that a very healthy or fun play pattern. And that's just with the Miras and the zombies. It's not talking Kusith or hell, something like a Montleonis could revive Mira, hypothetically, right? Luminous Puma. There's so many ways to get Mira back in Earth, and her ability to just kind of infinitely fade combat phases, I think is just really frustrating. And for that reason, I think that she merits a ban. And I think she actually holds back some really cool cards, like the Lightning Mirror. I think it's a card that would be considered for tournament play if this mirror didn't exist. I think that the ability to cash out a monster that did its effect on entry, say the zombie getting back a Leo, and then cash it out into effectively a Solemn Warning effect, is really cool. Don Corneo, this card just doesn't function the way that they intended it to. You can't print, you put the top 15 cards of your deck in the break zone. I can't believe it says that and doesn't say remove them from the game. But basically, this card says that if Don Corneo untaps, you win the game 90% of the time, and if you don't untap, the game is over. Like, one way or another, the game is decided with the Don Corneo on the field on turn 2, based on whether or not the Don Corneo got to do the mill or not. Logically, the card does, like, it's a cute concept. He's choosing that forward, that's now his, like his bride. But it's just, the card completely makes no sense. Why can he choose himself? Don't answer that. But I don't know. It's just completely broken. It's only going to continue to get dumber, and I don't enjoy the play pattern. Another weird one. I would like to see Sophie tried at 3 for a little bit, and this may actually be one that they would have to put right back on the list at 1. And I really like her at 1. I think she's a really fun and interesting win condition because she kind of plays a different game, but she plays it in a way that your opponent does have the ability to interact. You can Mist Dragon as Ursula enters the field, or you can Ixion the field, or Cucullin the Sophie before the end phase. I think she's actually a card that is, despite being a win condition in and of herself, actually shockingly interactive. And I really enjoy that about Sophie. And I've enjoyed the decks I've been able to play that actually have been able to play Sophie over the years. Stuff like the Ria Turbo list that used to use Sophie as an alternate win condition because they wanted to play Ursula for Cat 4 density for Ria anyway. And I actually thought Sophie was really fun in those decks. And I would like to see Monks as a deck, for example. But I think Monks is a super, super cool deck that hasn't really had a place, partly because Sophie was like the big boss monster monk and she's not been around. So I would like to see Sophie tried at 3. If this ends up being overwhelming, they can drop her back down to 1. But I think at this point, Garnet and even Sarah Mobius are more versatile cards than Sophie and would see more play. This is a funny one. I really, really like Porum as a card. I think she has a very healthy effect in the game. I like the scaling payload aspect of her. I think she's very interesting and unique in what she brings. But I also think that the whole slam Palom Porum turn 1, and in 2 turns I have an infinite win condition online is very frustrating for some decks. And maybe less so nowadays, but I find that Porum is a card with a very healthy play pattern and dynamic. And the only thing that actually is frustrating is that there's a second card with Porum's effect. So for that reason, I think that removing Palom from the card pool, this is weird because this is a legend I think they would have to ban. But removing Palom entirely would mean that Porum is just a healthy, fair card that Water or Water X decks could play. This is a bit big brain. Unfortunately, this is something that I don't like doing very often, which is banning around the problem. Porum is significantly better as a card, but because Porum is healthy and Palom is not healthy, I think that Palom is a card that probably would be better to remove from the format than Porum would be. This is probably at this point my second favorite card in the game, but I do think that Ria ends up being problematic when she's too good. I think that she does struggle to die to specific types of interaction. Things like Ferris or Brynhildr that would normally be good answers to a card like Ria do not work because she doesn't take damage at all from summons or abilities. And I think that kind of ends up that can be very frustrating for decks that don't have access to, specifically Lightning is like the bane of Ria's existence and always has been. And to a lesser extent, Water and Bounces. And I think that like the Ria is the best user of Amaterasu because the only thing better than Amaterasu is a free Amaterasu, and the investment needed to get to that is so minimal. So I really like the card, but I think she'd actually be really interesting to like put down to 1. Laswell, this one sucks. I really like Laswell as a card. I think that he's very powerful, and I really liked him when he was printed in Opus 16 because I thought that he was the card that made ice going second decks like actually really powerful. And I think there's actually a place that he could be really cool nowadays thanks to cards like Juggler. I think it like is a really cool buff to Laswell. The problem is that I have to find a way to hit knights, and I don't think Ramza or Karilla are the problems by themselves. I think either both cards, if you take away Laswell, are just significantly weaker than they would be. Which sucks, because Laswell's actually a really cool, powerful card. I think a generic good stuff ice card. But I think Laswell takes a deck that would be otherwise pretty manageable as an aggro deck and puts it completely over the top. So I think this is like the only way to keep knights from just spamming 4 forwards to the field and killing you turn 1. By removing the interactive part of the deck and just making them into a stompy aggro deck, which I don't like stompy aggro decks existing in the first place. But I don't see an answer that gets me there without banning this card. I don't think limiting Karilla does the trick. I really don't think that banning Ramza does it. Like, banning Ramza probably kills the deck as well. But I think that at that point, Karilla could pivot to other options and still just be a stompy aggro deck. And I think removing Laswell gives the deck, like, gives you counterplay to the deck by removing the deck's interaction. Both of these Zidanes are extremely powerful, but they're very frustrating. I think that I've never seen people get like as mad as they do when I play the Zidane. And to be fair, the Zidane has led to some really fun stories. I think of the time that I actually used somebody and got a full Final Fantasy VI party attack against them with the Setzer on field. I had Celes plus Mog plus Setzer that were all stolen. And I party attacked with Zidane, dull froze 3 characters, and yeah, that was a little broken. But I think overall, I don't think Zidane's doing anything very healthy. And I think that like this would also give Wind a natural pivot back to the Opus 3 hero, which is still a very strong and powerful, borderline toxic card. But I think one that's significantly less frustrating to play against. I think also the other problem with the Zidane is the way that he plays in the mirror match, which is effectively he becomes Pot of Greed in the mirror match. And if he ever steals either a copy of himself or a Kusith or a Azura, it gets even worse, because then he starts snowballing card advantage from the top of the other opponent's deck, and removing him no longer becomes an answer to deal with him. I think that this card is just very, very frustrating and just doesn't have a good answer to what he does. Similarly, this Zidane, I'm going to get some heat for this. I don't think this Zidane is as powerful as he's thought out to be. I do, however, think that Zidane enables one thing that I really don't like, which is that it reminds me a bit of a card like, to use a Yu-Gi-Oh reference, a Pointer of the Red Lotus is the name. And a Pointer of the Red Lotus gets to banish a card from your opponent's hand for a single turn. I think Zidane doesn't generate card advantage. And I don't think the haste or not blockable thing is like problematic by himself. But I think that in board states where there's only a couple specific answers, and the only two that really I think abuse this card to their maximum potential are 13. If 13 finds ways to sneak Zidane in, it's the worst feeling ever, because there's only a couple cards in any given deck that are designed to answer 13. And Refia Control. Refia Control needs to protect Refia, because if Refia survives, the game is effectively over. Nothing can compete with the card advantage that she generates. So Zidane ends up being a way to enable that deck as a control tool that also happens to be 2 different colors. I think the Fire Wind cards weren't so pathetic outside of Zidane. I think this card would see significantly less play, but because Fire Wind is a combination that needs to see play, because of 4-color Warrior of Light, the Zidane gets bumped up even higher than he normally would be, as being a pseudo protection spell for Refia that maybe sneaks across lethal at the right times. I think the card is more frustrating than he is good, but I think he's frustrating enough that people just... I don't enjoy seeing him, and I don't think anybody would complain in the same way, unless you're sitting on just large numbers of these full arts. Lightning is a card that I would like to see go to 1. I don't think that banning the face card of a starter deck is ideal, but this card being able to be hard drawn as frequently as she is ends up actually really sucking. And I also think that dealing with multiple copies of Lightning ends up being very annoying. So I think this would force the deck to spec into some combination of protection effects, recursion, and other things that require the deck to not try to kill you on turn 4 or lose the game. And I think that's probably a healthier play pattern for 13 as a whole. So that's what I would do with this card personally. Raijin, I think that having cards that do things when sent from the deck to the break zone is really cool. I do not think the thing that card should do is give itself and up to 2 other forwards haste. I think that that's a really, really scary design decision. I think that it will limit the ability to make self-mill a thing going forward. And I think that it's very frustrating the way that this ends up playing out, because because he also is a self-mill enabler. I have seen so many times where somebody goes Cypher, Mill Raijin, Mill Fujin, and the game ends because now they have 3 first strike haste 9k or 11k in Cypher's attacks. I really, when this card was printed, I hoped they would put Brave. Brave is not a lightning keyword. There was a bit of copium on my part, but I really didn't want to see this card have haste, and it did. Zeromus, I think, is a very frustrating card, and I've disliked this card ever since it was printed. I think that Alcid Zeromus has always been a combination that leads you to be more likely to win the game than lose it, if you are able to slam it quickly enough. I think Zeromus being able to disable the ability for your opponent to ever block, it takes away a facet of the game in a way, and I don't really think that that's a good place for the game to be. I don't think the card is... I think it's really broken in Gigawall especially. But if we follow the normal rule of we can't ban Legends, then the problem then becomes that Gigawall can still protect Zeromus. And... drop my phone. Gigawall protecting Zeromus leads to a lot of checkmate scenarios that I think are not good for the game as a whole. So I think Zeromus is just a card that I would like to see removed. Lulu, another starter card. This card is just too good, which is funny because I think that she is very close. And I do think that there's like situations that she's probably fine at 3. I think that removing Luso and Chocobo probably makes Lulu a card that is fine to be in the game at 3 copies per deck. But I think without that, there's a chance this card needs to go on the list. I think she's fine at 3. I would look at Hitting Wind. Like, once you hit Zidane and Luso and Chocobo summon, which, let me make sure I did get I did. Once those are limited, I think that Lulu is a card that you can probably leave at 3 and feel okay about. Because I think that especially if you put Chocobo to just 1, which is what I would do with Chocobo, I think having a card to recur it at 3 gives the deck a lot of interaction and points at which your opponent can stop you from getting access to your power card, which I think is cool. Refia, I would like to see go to 1. I don't think it's worth banning every single Warrior of Light backup that's ever been printed, and I don't think if that's not the case, then we probably have to touch Refia directly. I think that the concept of a draw engine, removal engine, and mana doubler is too much for the game. That should not come as shocking, but I think this card is too good at what it does. I think it restricts design space for future Warrior of Light cards. And I don't see any way that she leaves the format without some wave of power creep that I don't want to see what it looks like, or some kind of direct hit. And I think the direct hit of putting her to 1 is probably enough to where she could see play in a Warriors of Light focused deck, but not the Refia control engine that wins the game by getting to 4 Warrior of Light backups. Vanille, I would like to see go to 1 as well, next to Lightning. I think you could also arguably just ban Lightning, and Vanille is probably okay at 3. But I think that running Vanille at multiple copies enables Imperilga, which is maybe the strongest special in the game. I think that it's completely absurd that arguably the strongest aggro deck the game has ever seen has one of the most oppressive board wipes at its disposal with just running extra copies of Vanille thanks to the special. With almost no cost as well, I should add. Vanille is a fantastic card. EX Burst, the names that she searches are incredible. She searches 2 different backups in 2 different elements. There's Lightning is obviously a card that's never bad. Fang has great cards. Hope actually has a shocking number of very strong cards. I think this card just does way too much for what it would do, and I think that if my dream ban list happens and Lightning goes to 1, I think the deck is still really frustrating to play against unless Vanille also goes to 1. Dataluma is completely fine to go back to 3. This is going to sound shocking. We have better Dataluma in Ferris now. I would actually be curious to see if this would even see play if it was off the list at 3 copies per deck. This is the only other card other than Sophie that I think would be cool to see come back. I don't think that... I know people say, oh, Thaumaturge isn't really broken anymore. I don't want to play the game with Thaumaturge. Like, Thaumaturge, Rufus, Go. It just sounds awful to me. We're already dealing with that, and I think that we should have less discard enablers, not more. Renoa, this is one that might seem a bit strange to people, but I've never seen Renoa in a fair deck. Renoa is only there to enable some kind of forward span bullshit right now. Or I guess turbo discard, if that ever becomes a thing. Renoa flickering like Kurosame could be really potent in the future. She only does stupid things, and if you're going to do those stupid things, I would rather you have to play summons than a 6 CP backup. So, even though I really like the art on this card, I think the effect is really interesting. I think that she's only going to be used for evil, and for that purpose, I would think she is better not in the format. Sid Randell. This is a weird one because this card went a long time as kind of But I have also seen this card just win games by himself in the same way. In a way that I think the only other card I've seen win games harder than Sid Randell is Thanos. At least as like a you can't do anything way. I guess Neo X Death is probably on the same level. Sid Randell, Neo X Death, and Thanos are like the floodgate cards that say you can't play the game. And I think Sid Randell is probably the best of them right now. And you need specific outs that some decks aren't playing. I have literally gone through topping deck lists that do not have a way of stopping this card once he is on the field. And I think for that reason, I kind of would like to see this card removed. El Cid, this is probably a personal one. He's mostly fine. I think I would still probably leave him at 3, especially if I would ban Zeromus, which is a card I think is probably more applicable to have removed. But he does also kind of just remove the ability to block as long as he's on the field, thanks to the ability to just dull and freeze things perpetually. And just shitting out Ice and Lightning forwards for no reason. He's essentially a free forward if you have anything that you wanted to play anyway with him. So I don't like the card. I think he is very annoying. But I think he's probably not broken enough to need to be banned. But he would be on my like quote-unquote watch list of cards to ban. Whew, we're getting into some spicier stuff. Warrior of Light. This card is having massive unintended consequences. I really hope I said this, because I kind of was thinking this when this card was revealed. And maybe there's no record of me saying this. But this card's existence kind of scared me. And the reason why is that if this ever became the best thing you could do, then there would be no reason to not play it. And if you play this card, then every single card in those elements all of a sudden goes in that deck. And you end up with the pendulum problem in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where every single card that's ever been printed in these 4 elements shows up in a good stuff pile with no other synergies other than, well, we need to be playing 4 colors for Warrior of Light anyway. And it really restricts deck building diversity. If every deck is playing every element, why are you playing a specific deck? And sure, like, tech card differences are still going to be there and different things, but it restricts card design too, because now Ice and Lightning are not showing up in these. But the other 4 elements now, if you print, say, Amaterasu 2 in Wind, well, it's going to show up in this deck as well. So you can't really buff Wind without buffing the 4-color soup deck. This card has shown up in everything from 4 colors to Warrior of Light to Soiree to Kirin decks to Mono Earth as a win condition. It's been cheated into play off of Cecil Index before, I've seen. Off of Iodolus, and they clearly intended it to be a card you could cheat into play. I don't think that was the problematic thing. And it also just sees play in Gilgamesh BE/Gigawall decks as this card is 4 colors and card name Warrior of Light, which is just the dumbest excuse I've ever seen to play a card. So it sees play for what it does, what it is, and what it represents. And every single one of those situations is just kind of adding up to where this card is homogenized in the format. Think back to before this card was printed and how often you would see 2-color decks. Earth-Water decks, for instance. Fire-Earth, Wind-Earth, Wind-Ice. And now all you see are the 4-color decks and mono decks. There's no in-between anymore. And I think that a lot of that is Warrior of Light's fault. Rufus, I've said it before, you cannot trade up into Rufus if he comes down early enough. I think even without the cost reduction, a 2CP 7k, because you make your opponent discard, is really frustrating to play against. It's not a healthy play pattern. And there is no removal spell that does 7k for 2CP. There isn't. You can't even just throw a blocker in front of him because he can dull freeze the blocker, at which point you probably discarded to play the blocker, and you're discarding again anyway. So I really liked Rufus as maybe an alternative way of having the on-attack trigger in Ice. If he was a 2CP 7k that didn't discard on entry, I would actually, I think, like him more, because he's not immediately having an impact on the board state. But I think that he does it because he does it on entry. I really am frustrated with this card. I would probably put him to 1 just because the legend rule. By the way, Warrior of Light is not a card you can put to 1. You have to ban this card. I know that they haven't wanted to ban legends in the past. Generally, I'd like to try to follow that philosophy where I can, but I don't think Warrior of Light can exist in a healthy game state. And I think Rufus, you could probably have it 1 and be okay, as much as I really don't like discard as a game mechanic. Rugdagene, fuck this card. This card is really stupid. I think that taking 2 damage before you've taken your first turn is frustrating enough. I don't also need to be having multiple cards ripped out of my hand, or multiple things dull frozen, or any number of random on-attack triggers. Something like Zidane, where it's like, if taking 2 damage and my opponent has now drawn 2 cards, so they're on a 4-card hand with a... I think that also he's above curve. Why? Why is this a 4CP 9k? So he doesn't even die to Hecaton Shear. Like, the stuff that should answer this card doesn't answer it at all. So you end up in the situation where you can't clear this idiot, and he does so much damage so quickly. And he removes counterplay. You can't Amaterasu the thing that he gives the 4k to, or the 3k to, most of the time, because guess what? It now probably is above 8,000 power. And you can't Amaterasu Rug, because Rug is 9k himself. I really feel like this is a card that they like played off of 2 or 4 backups in playtesting, and went, oh yeah, this is kind of cool, you know? But whenever this guy shows up, there's like this really frustrating gameplay loop of, I am dead in 3 turns if my opponent draws any forward. But I also can't clear the field, and also my opponent's plussing off of these on-attack triggers that are meant to be kind of slow. I don't think this card is doing what he was meant to be doing. I don't know what he was meant to be doing. I thought he was kind of a meme when I first read him, because it's kind of funny. But the more I've played against this card and with this card, the stupider I think he is, and the less I really want him. The less I want him in the format. Zenos. This is kind of very similar to Rug. I like the flavor of this card, other than I don't know why he gives category 14 forwards haste. It's not a very Zenos thing to be a leader. That one doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I feel like Zenos is like a loner, but regardless, I think the idea of like, you know, Zenos killing the top of your deck for power is kind of a cool concept that fits with the character and the lore. But I also really don't like the OTK deck that he enables. The whole, you're dead on turn 2 with Hien Zenos. It's like the combo is like Hien Zenos, Alize Alfino, and either Louisoix or Gosetsu. And it's shockingly consistent because Zenos is also an accelerant for that deck and that engine. I just don't think games should end on turn 3. That might be a controversial opinion. Man in Black is a weird one. I think Man in Black is one of my favorite cards in the game. It's really cool. It's really powerful, but it's also very frustrating because you can't interact with what he does outside of a Mist Dragon or Amaterasu as he enters. I think he is okay for now, given that I think that Lightning would be in a very rough state without him. But I think this is a card that I would put on my little internal watch list. Oh, I missed Realm. Um, yeah, monsters are really, really strong. And Tori Kelly would get his wish probably with if I was in charge of this. I could see an argument to put her at 1. I like the idea of like this being a searchable power play. You do this one time, you get a big burst of tempo and power, and then your opponent deals with her and can deal with the messes she's created. But when she starts being repeatable, and every time you play Realm, you actually plus, she is by herself generating 7 CP before the cards she plays have done anything. You get 1+2 and 2+2. You've generated 7 CP by playing 5. And there's not a lot of cards that are CP positive in the same way that Realm is. For a long time, playing the monsters was a cost, and that's just not the case anymore. We're past the point where it is bad to be playing monsters. Monsters are one of the strongest card types in the game. Having an enabler this good is horrific. I can't believe they did that. Neo X Death. I don't think this card is the strongest card, like the meta warping threat it was, but it's never been fun. This card sucks. And I think that like the Neo X Death game plan of like Neo X Death, Tama, and 30 EX burst sucks ass. Get rid of it. Une. Kind of similar to Man in Black. I like Une. I like what she enables. The biggest issue that I have with Une, and this is kind of similar from Man in Black, like they can both loop Kusith, which is like annoying, but I think it's like expensive enough to be fair, is Une outs herself. So you end up with these really frustrating game states sometimes where the only way to get another Une off the field, because you have to kill Une, you can't let Une on tap, is to cast your own Une. And you end up in Une Wars, where both of you basically like start pitching your hand until you draw something that kills the Une that isn't a copy of Une. But like you just kind of like destroy all the progress that like built up over the first like 8 turns of the game or whatever. It's a really silly gameplay loop that's kind of frustrating. I would be fine putting Une to 1, but I also think that she is okay at 3. Griever. Why is there no once per turn on this card? I know that like this isn't tearing up the meta or anything. It's not the most broken card ever printed. I just want to have a talk. I don't think this card should be more than once per turn. If you want to discard 2 cards every turn cycle because you've stuck a Sage and a Rosa, I'm more okay with that. But I don't think that sticking Griever on turn 1 and then turn 2 drawing into Sage Rosa should mean that Griever is now Kurasame. And God forbid they find a second Sage. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. I don't think the play pattern's fun. I think the fact that it also punishes you for getting it off the field sucks. A lot of times you can only remove this in specific ways, and then when it dies, it can turn into my favorite stupid one. It can turn into an Adia, which then gets you another copy of Griever, or it can turn into a Matoya and get back the same freaking Griever. Like, there's ways of dealing with this card, and it's not meta warping, but I don't like it or the play pattern it enables. Fel Thanos, there are decks that just cannot deal with this card. Ice Lightning for a long time was actually gate kept because this card existed. I've seen this card literally solo that deck before, where it's like the deck that's against it plays 1 to 2 backups and then drops the Fel Thanos. The Ice Lightning players' cards might as well have no text. Warrior of Light. I don't know what more I need to say about this card. I will say that this is not a knock against any players that win using this card. I think that this is a card that is strange because it rewards skill expression and power, and there's a reason that good players play this card in this deck so well. But I also think that it's completely absurd in its power level. You don't want to remove it because removing it allows them to pay 7 to gain another 10 CP's worth of CP. You have to remove it because the special is so absurd. And I don't see... I don't know. I just... It's really frustrating on like all fronts. It's a random card. It can feel really bad to play it. I've played it with 35, 36 targets in my deck and completely whiffed. And like I understand like variance is a part of card games, but I don't like the variance in this way. Again, really, really, really high skill cards. There's a reason that like the best player in the world cannot lose with this deck. But I don't think that the counterplay is adequate for what it represents. I don't think Amaterasu on his entry, because he doesn't die to it, does enough to hold him in check. You just kind of like buying time. Theodore, I just don't like the concept of discard 3 being a thing. This card's probably okay. I would just have him on like a little internal watch list of cards. Warrior of Light, I could see an argument for putting him at 1, especially with a couple of other hits that I have. But I think that in any copies higher than 1, he's too powerful, too consistent, and too good. And I think that also dealing with the second Warrior of Light usually ends the game. For summons, this is a card I don't think I would ban, but I would have it on my internal watch list. Buyback is a really scary mechanic. I think the cost on this one is relatively appropriate, but I've also seen this card cast 5 times in a single turn. So the power level is not incredible, but I do think the card is very frustrating. And I think that the play pattern of I'm going to do this over and over and over again is not ideal. Chocobo Summon. This card is really, really, really obnoxious and really powerful. I don't get why it's literally free. You pay 2 CP plus the card, you get back the card that you target, and you get to draw a card to replace the Chocobo Summon. So it's literally free. I could see this going to 1 and being okay with it. And then making them use the Lulu to continuously get it back. I think it's a healthier play pattern than what Chocobo enables. I am missing Luso on this list. There's a couple I'm missing. Luso should absolutely be on this list, by the way. Luso should get banned so we can print good wind cards. You want to see more of me talk about wind and why I think Luso is leading to what's called a parasitic game development. You should watch my other video, but I don't think I explained very well. Parasitic in game design terms means that the mechanic takes over everything that it's doing. Luso warps the entirety of wind and mono wind around himself in a way that I don't think is intended, healthy, or good for the game. Arc. So I really like Chaos Arc. I think the combination is really cool. I like that it took this legend from multiple sets ago and gives it a reason to exist. But a lot of what I have here would lower the power level of the format. And I think there's a potential for this card to run away with things. And I think it limits design space. I think the cards like Chaos and Little Leela become a lot scarier to make when Arc exists. I think that especially like Dark LBs become really scary. I think Light LBs are going to be really scary in the future because of Medine for a similar reason. But yeah, this card is just super, super powerful in a way that's kind of scary. I think I missed Amaterasu here. I don't know if I would remove Amaterasu because I think it's kind of a necessary evil. But I don't like how Amaterasu is very commonly used to protect aggro board states from being answerable. I think that's like really frustrating when it's like, the only way I can get back into the game is to have Shantoto. My opponent has 3 cards in hand. And there's no counterplay to Amaterasu at that point. The counterplay is they don't have Amaterasu, which against something like 13, they've already thinned a couple cards out of the deck and drawn 3 cards afterwards. They probably have the Amaterasu. The game is probably over. I think if it said non-backups or something, I would like it more if it was meant to be like a thing. But I don't like that element of Amaterasu. But I do think that, like, what else stops cards like Giga Wall than Amaterasu? Atomos is a card that I think if we banned it, I think Realm could be okay still in the game, especially at 1 copy. Wind would be really, really weak. Wind would need a lot of help after these changes. But they would have to pivot the design direction of Wind to focus on cards that help build a character count rather than just repeat the same entry effects over and over again. Which is probably a good design direction for Wind to go in. I think if Wind would rebuild itself around a combination of like Bismarck, Ace, and Dryad, I think that'd be a really cool direction to take it. Rather than I'm going to repeat the same 3 casts until I cast Luso and wipe the entire board. And Atomos is just practically an untargetable enabler of that. For backups, Chocolate just draws too many cards, and I think can be an issue because of that. Again, 2CP backups are not meant to be interactable. I don't think they should be. I don't think they should print 2CP backup hate, because that'd be like even worse. So I think snipping off some of the like really problematic uses of 2CP backups as a resource engine that can't be interacted with or destroyed would be nice. I think Chocolate is the prime example of that. Unalesca, same thing. I don't think having perpetual access to your opponent discards cards is good. Also, under monsters, Scale Toad, fuck that card. Unalesca Scale Toad especially existing, or like any type of perpetual discard, whether it's Rufus or something else. I think with Scale Toad ends up being really frustrating. But Unalesca, I really don't like the play pattern that she enables. I don't think that my opponent's on a one card hand, so I can, or my opponent goes to a no card hand, they draw two. They probably are going to play one of their cards, so I'm going to rip the last card of their hand out of their, or the last card out of their hand every single turn, even at a cost, is good. It's actually really frustrating. So, at least like Rufus is a forward you can theoretically interact with. I don't think that's the case for Unalesca. Outside of Ice, ironically, but not every deck is Ice. Lufenian, I think we are past the critical mass of discard right now, and I would like to see a little bit of it trimmed off. This card is really frustrating both to play with and against, so I would love to see this card gone. And Sarah FFL, I think, is the better hit than Bart's. I think Bart's is annoying because he can't really be interacted with. But I think banning Sarah is maybe a better way of dealing with it, because I think banning Sarah could allow Gigawall to exist at 1. And it could allow Refia Control to still have power plays. Like, you could still play Refia Control. Or, like, not play it, but, like, I think it gets a lot worse without Sarah FFL. And I think that that also means that Bart's is no longer Sildra. It's iffy. I don't love the idea of banning this, but I think she's turning into Sildra faster than she's becoming anything else. There's definitely a couple here. I'm like trying to remember, like, off the top of my head, like, what all I missed while making this list. There's definitely some, but I think this would be like a decent starting place for like cards that I think are not doing anything healthy, good, strong, any of that for the format right now. And there's definitely, like, I think after like doing this, Wind would be in complete shambles. I don't think there's anything that like Wind would be able to do. I think that like Fire would be really good. I think Lightning would be almost completely untouched. Yeah, like Raijin's not really like that generic. I mean, I guess like the 8 package is generic, but I don't really care. I think that Lightning doesn't do anything completely absurd right now. A couple other cards people are going to say, like, why isn't this on here? Oh, Valifor. Valifor needs to be banned under summons. I missed that one. Valifor is about the only thing that makes the infinite loop actually win the game. Banning Zidane doesn't stop the infinite loop from working. I don't think the infinite loop should exist, even though I don't think it's particularly powerful. Valifor is a card that's never going to do anything healthy or fair again. Same logic to me as Renoa. Because it's not doing anything healthy or fair, I don't want it to be around. You might ask, why is Tilica still here? I think Tilica is not actually a problem card yet. Tilica would be on the watch list. I should have mentioned it here. But I don't think Tilica is a problem by herself. And I think she enables Retainers, which is a really cool deck that I would like to see stick around. No bias there whatsoever, but I don't think Retainers is an unhealthy deck. I think that Retainers is a very interactive, interesting deck with a lot of power plays. And I think that having Tilica allows the deck to still be viable in a cool deck. And for that reason, I would want to take it out until she starts being problematic in another deck. And like I said, Valifor removes the loop problem anyway, and banning Tilica doesn't stop the loop, if that makes sense. Are there any other really interesting things off the top of my head? If there are any that you could think of, feel free to let me know. But in the meantime, that's kind of my thoughts on cards that I would like to see removed from the game. I could be wrong on some of these. You definitely feel free to let me know. I definitely probably have missed more than a couple. That's just the nature of stuff like this. But I think the game with these cards removed, restricted, limited, would be in a better spot overall. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.